things I put down that I'm going to touch on for a bit today. So be thinking about this, but seeding, establishment, renovation, whatever you're going to do, it's certainly something. It's been another tough year, and between extreme heat, drought, then too much rain, etc. And then we're going to have Dr. Askew chime in a little bit about how weed control fits in that. I want to talk about fertilization because most of us in the state are growing cool season grasses, and it's prime time to get geared up for that, but we'll also put the warm season grasses to bed right time. We want to talk a little bit about aeration. So those are agronomics. But first, from what David said, I think we should talk about, in particular, crabgrass, because it has gone bonkers and continues to going bonkers. What are we going to do about it now?
Well, if you don't have a pre-emerge program in place, then most lawns in that situation right now are nearly 100% crabgrass, or some mixture of crabgrass, goosegrass, and what other weed happened to be able to get a toehold and get established before crabgrass took over. And what's going to happen when the first hard frost hits in several weeks, that crabgrass is going to start to die back naturally after having deposited millions, if not billions, of seed. And poa annua will have already germinated underneath that crabgrass. And as the crabgrass dies, the poa is going to come in and take over, and other winter weeds. And so that's the cycle probably for as many as half of Virginia lawns, is that we manage a little bit of desirable turf grass and this kind of dynamic flux between summer weeds and winter weeds, and all of which are green and they mow, and you can maintain them at a typical lawn height, and passersby on the road would not be the wiser, other than the fact that the lawn is, it's not Better Homes and Gardens. It's a lime green, and then as one weed dies and another takes its place, we have discoloration, patchiness, these things that everybody wants to get rid of. So
all right, so here's the $64,000 question, and
right,
I don't think
$50,000 is all I'll charge you.
All right, so that's good. 14,000 in reserve. Will you recommend now that you should treat for crabgrass, or this is one of those, I don't know, what would you tell someone to do? Is this a good thing, bad thing? We're 6 weeks, 8 weeks out for most people killing frost. Is it still early enough?
Right. The first thing they teach you in academia is 20 different ways to say it depends.
That's right.
In this case, though, so if you're dealing with predominantly, all right, so look at the image here. If you had a situation like that, the determining factor as to whether you're going to spray and kill that crabgrass or not depends on what type of aesthetic you desire, because that is a situation like that can be managed physically with mowing. It can be that those crabgrass plants are going to get a little bit larger between now and frost, but not that much. And so a scenario like that, you're not in dire straits of having to treat those plants. If you did, though, it's only going to help. I would argue, I'm a weed scientist, so I would argue for killing weeds at every opportunity. But in a situation like this, you can hand pull the worst of those plants, and you can limp through into the fall season and have an extremely healthy, happy turf, given the things that you're going to talk about in a little bit with fertility and whatnot, if those are done properly. But if you had a situation where, let's say, the crabgrass you see in that image was the desirable turf, and the turf was the crabgrass, and there's a lot of those situations out there right now, there really is no good way to seed new turf into that scenario without taking crabgrass out. So you would have to, your options there are use a glyphosate containing product and renovate the entire area. Mm-hmm. But in my opinion, it would be far better to use a selective product that contains the active ingredient quinclorac, because it will kill the crabgrass, and you could spray with your left hand and throw fescue seed with your right hand. So it's not going to harm the fescue as it's germinating and coming up. So preserve what fescue you have, kill the crabgrass that's there, and within a week or so, or same day, whatever your schedule permits, throw that seed out there and scratch it in and try to rejuvenate that lawn.
Now, does tenacity fall in here anywhere, or would that be other purposes?
Okay, so tenacity, in my opinion, for fall programs, one of the best approaches or uses for that product is, okay, now we're getting ready to seed that lawn. tenacity is not going to take large crabgrass out if you have a huge dense situation.
So not nearly as well as
not as quickly.
Okay.
You know, it's not going to give us what we need in that seed establishment because it takes about 4 weeks for tenacity to get the job done. 2 applications over about a 4-week period before the crabgrass is crispy, right? And at that point, there's no competition, even for space. Your fescue seedlings will be happy. Quinclorac or the Drive or other Quincept products that contain quinclorac, they're going to get that job done in about 5 days. You're going to go from green to crispy.
And that's what
10 days at
that's
the
what we're
most.
looking for.
That's
now.
what we're looking for because we want to obliterate the crabgrass so that we can get our fescue seedlings up and established. But tenacity plays an important role at this time of year, in my opinion, for people who have dealt with poa annua in the spring and they want to break that cycle. One of the best ways to do it is with tenacity. And there's not a lot of information about this specifically, at least on the label, but if you enter a treatment program where you apply tenacity, and you could mix it with the Drive if you wanted, but in this case, the tenacity is going to be a preventative for POA. It's not going to last very long. It's not a real good pre-emerge herbicide, but as a post-emerge, early post-emerge knockdown, it's awesome. And so what we're doing is we're going to put tenacity down up front at seeding. 4 weeks later, we're going to get on a program where we're applying 2 to 4 ounces of tenacity every 2 weeks. And what that does is it keeps, as the POA germinates, the little tiny plants, that tenacity will hit them and kill them. And then 2 weeks later, we spray again, and 2 weeks later. So this is something the homeowner is going to have to do themselves because it's unlikely that a lawn care operator is going to come back on that type of frequency. Not to mention you wouldn't be able to afford it. But that will keep young POA plants from coming in and establishing with the fescue, so that next spring, what would have been a 40 to 60% POA population is now a 2 or 3% POA population. We're trying to give the fescue the time to get up and out-compete surrounding plants, and that tenacity, those frequent applications, kills the young plants and lets us do that.
Okay, let's see, we got a question here. What was the name of the weed killer you just named that can be used to add to glyphosate? Can you spell, in addition to glyphosate? So it must be quinclorac.
So the comment was there's 2 options when dealing with a solid stand of crabgrass. Option 1 is use glyphosate.
Wait, can you type that into the answer box?
Roundup or any of the glyphosate containing. So that was one option. But the other option was not a mixture. It was a different.
No, I read it wrong. She was saying in addition, so it wasn't to add it to glyphosate. That you were talking.
Okay, yeah. So the other option is any of the products that are on the market that contain quinclorac. So you're gonna. Quinclorac. That's 100%. Correct. Yep, quinclorac. And product names would include Drive Accelerate, XLR8. Would be one option. Drive 75DF, quinclorac 75DF from Qualipro.
You said Quincept, was that one?
Quincept is another one. And then we have some multi or combo products. For example, FMC has a product called Square One. Right. It's a combination of quinclorac and carfentrazone, so it kills young broadleaves and any grasses that try to come up.
Q4?
Q4 would be another one that would have quinclorac in there. But again, though, some of these, like Q4 is a good example. You would not want to use that in this scenario because it carries a 4-week seeding restriction.
Yeah, that's what Shawn's saying. So you look, these are the not the trade name. Quinclorac is its active ingredient, chemical name.
Active ingredient, and that may be found in many different products.
Yeah, but what Shawn just said is really key because we always have people that like, oh, I saw this and I can control all these other things. That's great. It is great, but that Q4, not if you're going to seed.
Right, something like Q4, Solitaire, these combo products that have multiple active ingredients, and one of those would be quinclorac. They're more for coming out mid-season, and I've got crabgrass over here, and I've got sedge over here, and I've got broadleaves over here. I'm going to spray this one product and it takes them all out. That's what that's for. What we're looking for is either quinclorac or a mixture of quinclorac and mesotrione or tenacity for the POA. It's a totally separate deal. But the quinclorac needs to really go out alone. And the reason that I mentioned tenacity as another possibility in the mixture is because both of those products can be used at seeding without harming the fescue.
When you're using quinclorac, I remember a while ago, so it was like a crop oil had to be added to it.
Sure.
Is that still the case?
That's still the case. It's pretty important. So the comment is that when you use quinclorac-based products, they're going to perform far better if you use a methylated seed oil adjuvant or a crop oil concentrate. Now, these are products that you can find. You can find them online through an online retailer, but you can also find them at, say, a co-op, Southern States, Landscape Supplies, someone that deals in professional products. If you have a really nice nursery local,
And these are not traditional non-ionic
Right.
surfactants. Because that's what a lot of people just say, oh, I bought a surfactant.
right.
We're very
So these
specialized.
are, see, it gets so confusing because crop oil concentrates and methylated seed oils are a type of non-ionic surfactant. They don't have a charge to them, but they're a different classification. So you can't just say I want an NIS, or you also can't say I want an adjuvant, and they just grab whatever they grab and give you it. In this case, you're going to be better served to specify crop oil concentrate or methylated seed oil, preferably one that's approved for use in lawns. But most of them nowadays are. Back in the day, these things had a lot of impurities in them that would burn foliage, but most of them now are so refined that almost anything off the shelf would be safe for the lawn. Now, if you were to use a regular non-ionic surfactant, you're going to lose about 15 to 20% of your weed control performance. If you do not add a surfactant at all, you're going to lose 25 to 40% of your weed control performance. So that's the difference that it would make.
And what's always fascinated me about quinclorac, the dry product, is mid-sized crabgrass plants, it's kind of so-so. Tiny ones, it gets. We're not many there. It's the humongous ones now. The activity on it, to me, is amazing.
Yep.
And that it is so good and so effective at this time of year on large plants.
Yeah, it is strange that you can come in on a 4 to 8 tiller plant, which is kind of early June, and typically the product requires 2 applications. But a pie platter that we would encounter this time of year, it'll kill it with single application. So it's really, quinclorac's a really good cleanup product. Tenacity is much more typical in that the older the weed gets, the harder it is for the herbicide to kill. You know, but quinclorac doesn't fit that paradigm.
All right, so got a question. Please address the environmental impact of these chemicals. Are any recommended by county agent publications? Also, we might need to see the names in print. So again, Whit, had you typed those in the
Right.
in the Q&A chat box? Whitney is typing in these names so that you can see them, and I can assure you these are in the pest management guide, the PMG.
Sure.
So I'll let you go ahead, Dr. Askew.
Yeah, so in the both in the home lawn section of the pest management guide and in the professional turf pest management guide in the Horton Forest Crops one, you're going to find the active ingredients for everything that we've mentioned so far. In terms of toxicity and safety, that's it's more of a heated public debate, especially right now with all these lawsuits that are going on targeting glyphosate and other products. Suffice it, at least for me, to say that the EPA rigorously tests all of these products, and if they're used per label recommendation, they are safe. You can be sure that they're safe.
Okay. Shawn, when I think about what's going on, we're almost at the end of August. To me, Labor Day is when I start thinking seriously about fall to get there. When are these things going to be germinating? I know it varies around the state. I use Labor Day as kind of my window. If I'm going to try to control winter annual weeds, I'm usually trying to get a pre-emergent out on my lawn or my turf plots somewhere around Labor Day week. Is that smart? Does that typically work? I'm not going to the trouble of growing degree days, but when is this happening?
Well, so different weeds are going to germinate at different times. They each have different cues, but mostly it's based on moisture and even more importantly on temperature. And as the temperature starts to drop, that's going to stimulate winter weeds to germinate. Sometimes in shady spots, that can happen way earlier than the norm, whatever the norm is. The norm's going to shift as much as a month from one year to the next. But for example, if we're tracking this visually for spring, summer weeds, we go to sun-exposed banks where the turf has been thinned or removed, or on an ornamental bed or something where you have bare ground.
That's where you see it first.
That's where you see it first. Yeah. All right. You do the opposite for winter weeds. You go to a shady spot where there's going to be at least enough moisture to stimulate germination, but very protected, north-facing, cooler that's where you're going to go, because you're going to see them 2 weeks earlier at least than everywhere else. Out in the lawn, because of the competition, the weeds often will lag 3 weeks or more behind bare areas. And so, so for example, I'm already in Blacksburg seeing poa annua starting to tiller. We have areas in shady spots along gravel driveways that there's kind of a chia pet of poa annua. And that's got me worried, because I'm trying to put out research trials on pre-emerge activity. But when I go in the turf and I dig, it's hard to convince myself that I'm seeing POA at this point. So,
but it's not
it's
far
coming.
if it's not happening.
As air temperatures drop consistently below 70 degrees at night, POA annua is going to start germinating. And we've seen that in the last week. I'm told it's going to get a little bit warmer next week, but we're in that overlap area. We're in that gray area where this starts to happen right now, at least in Blacksburg. If we move to Richmond, it's going to be a few weeks. It's going to be sometime in early to mid-September when this will start happening.
So I am telling people right now, be geared up for seeding. You've already touched on, and be aware that seeding and chemistry, Shawn said it, we've repeated it, we'll continue to repeat it. Not everything can be used for weed control and then followed up with fescue, bluegrass, ryegrass, fine fescue, etc. Tenacity did have a lot of forgiveness. Drive has quite a bit of forgiveness in terms of doing this, but many of the chemistry, so people ask me all the time, if I want to pre-emerge my lawn for winter weed control, can I? And I'm like, absolutely, just as you would in the spring, but you cannot apply grass seed.
Right.
So let's touch on from that standpoint. Standard pre's will work, but really not work in terms of seeding, fescue, bluegrass, etc.
Yeah, 2% is your only pre-emerge product that we can apply, that has at least a month of residual activity, and you can put it down at seeding.
And realistically, homeowners' opportunity getting that? Is that?
Oh, no, there's plenty of opportunity for getting it. There's consumer-based products that contain Siduron, so SIDUR.
Probably on the web, or I don't see it at most lawn and garden centers is what I'm
okay.
thinking.
Well, you'd have to find usually they're granular products, and they're designed around to be used at seeding.
Yep.
But anyway, it's not going to do you any good in the fall anyway. That is a spring seeding product because it works really well on crabgrass, but it doesn't work well on broadleaves, and it doesn't work at all on poa annua. So it's not going to do a lot for us in the fall. So barring that one, all of your other pre-emerge products that are on the market are a no-go for putting out prior to seeding. You need your seedlings established at least 6 to 8 weeks before you could come in with one of those products, which might be a good option because that can lay down a barrier to POA for the rest of the year and other winter weeds. Other products that can be used at seeding, it's a limited list. It's just 2 or 3 of them. I'll tack these off. We've already mentioned quinclorac, Drive, and the other base products. Tenacity, we've mentioned, mesotron, etc. Carfentrazone, which is quicksilver and also one of the components of square one and those. And that's it. I mean, really for consumer obtainable products, those are the products that can be used at seeding. Most of the others are going to carry a substantial restriction on post-application that you would have to wait before seeding.
Okay, so here's what is the best / preferred granular pre-emergent for St. Augustine, and when should the pre-emerge be applied? So in this case, if it's a monoculture of St. Augustine grass, and generally speaking, most of the land-grant universities, we don't recommend to overseed St. Augustine grass with ryegrass. It is faster growing, but it usually results in a real mess in the spring. This would be, we're just trying to keep St. Augustine grass clean for dormancy period. What are our options?
It's for pre-emerge in St. Augustine, the first thing that comes to mind is an atrazine-based product.
Are homeowners going to have access to that?
Homeowners would have access to that, yes. And it's legal to use in the state of Virginia in the coastal plain area, but not in the Piedmont and mountainous areas.
Okay. Which we aren't going to have any St. Augustine grass there
we
anyway.
Should not have. We did our best to try to find cold tolerant St. Augustines, brought them to Blacksburg, and they all died.
Yeah,
so,
imagine that.
Yeah. Atrazine or simazine.
Yeah, and there are some, I guess, the big boxes, but they're going to have to do some looking, because I saw this the further south I went, it's much more evident. So in the beach, around that area, but you're going to have to do some looking, because I don't find those as
You're not going to see them around
common.
here.
No, you're not going to find them here because it doesn't
those
apply
products are not registered for any of our cool season grasses. And so in areas where fescue is prevalent, it would not be wise to stock products that harm fescue as a pre-emergent.
What about our more traditional pre's in lawns? So the prodiamines, barricades, dithiopyr, dimension, pendulum, pendimethalin. Yes, no, wouldn't?
I don't have a lot of experience with using those. I don't have any experience with using those in St. Augustine, so I would have to confer with one of my southern colleagues. Perhaps Mike Goatley, who's been 15 years at
It's
Mississippi
been
State.
15 years. I don't recall there were issues. And again,
Yeah.
we'll always tell you, what we tell you is the best we can remember. I know, but got to make sure it's on that label to go. But my recollection was that there weren't issues with many of our standard pre-emergents. But again, check that and make sure. We have St. Augustine in the state, but boy, we have so very little outside of the work that Dr. Durr and Adam Nichols are doing over at Hampton Roads. That's our challenge. And this would be one, if our person asking the question, again, if you're in that area, you might give Jeff and Adam a shout there at the Hampton Roads AREC and get this straight from them, because they did a webinar for us I guess a couple of months ago, but we didn't talk this one specifically. Let's see. Could you spell the name of that pre-emergent you mentioned would be suitable for St. Augustine? I'm sorry.
What about Bermuda grass? Plenty of that in Central Virginia.
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll have to have Dr. Askew. So Bermuda control is certainly.
I think they're wanting pre-emergent.
Oh, pre-emerge, yes. Well, then on the pre-emerge, all those grasses, the standard pre-emergent complex pretty much applies here. So the prodiamine, which the common trade name, or one of the most common, is barricade. Pendimethalin, again, many things out there, but pendulum is one we see a lot of. Scott's Halts has. Does it have pendulum
That's
in it?
pendulum based.
Okay.
Pendimethalin based.
Yeah.
Ronstar.
Yeah. Ronstar.
The granular.
Yeah. Dithiopyr are all possibilities there. Now, and if the Jeff and Adam, who and how to contact, Whitney's going to take care of that.
There's a great question on tenacity.
Question on tenacity.
Somebody says, for one, tenacity 2 ounce per what? That would be 2 ounces of 2 to 3 ounces of. If you're on that, all right, let me back up. Standard rate range for tenacity is 5 to 8 ounces of product per acre. You can purchase tenacity in an 8-ounce container for about $55 online, and that 8 ounces will apply the high rate on an entire acre. So it's a great product for consumers to obtain because the price is affordable and it's a small quantity. It's easy to store, and it will keep pretty well. I mean, several years based on our storage here at Tech. When using tenacity to prevent poa annua from encroaching into a rejuvenated tall fescue lawn, I would go out initially at roughly on the seeding date with 5 ounces of product per acre. The label requires that we then wait 28 days before we can apply the product again. But 28 days after the emergence of the fescue, I would get right back on it with 2 to 3 ounces of product per acre to target those tiny little poa annua seedlings that are coming up. 2 weeks after that, I would hit it again with 2 to 3 ounces of product per acre, and 2 weeks after that, I'd hit it again. After those 3 post-emergence applications, you should be your fescue should be thick enough that you no longer need, and I would argue as soon as you get fescue canopy coverage and you're mowing, you no longer need to apply this product to suppress poa annua unless you have a lot of thin spots in the lawn. It's only where the poa annua is going to have the ability to challenge that lawn that you need to continue to treat. But 2 to 3 applications after the seeding is about all typically that's needed.
Okay. And part of what we are constantly preaching in our tag team is that, remember, the weed control component of all this, and we spend a lot of time, this becomes a somewhat moot point if you've got decent turf. Our challenge is in Virginia, this climate isn't very conducive to always having decent turf. But if you're in a situation where you've come through with a lawn, warm season or cool season, in pretty good shape this year, the necessity of doing many of these things is you might not have to. Matter of fact, in many cases, you don't have to. But if you are in a situation where you're going to have to do, especially in the cool season world, some reseeding, Now's the time to get geared up for that, to take advantage, because fall is the preferred time for establishment. Even though most seed is sold in the spring, now's the time to do that. And pay attention to your weed control programs when you're going out with seed. Do anything that you can to get soil to seed contact, because seed germinates on top of grass, but if it germinates there, it's going to die. But get geared up to make your renovations now. It ties together quite well if your lawn needs to be aerated. To get the, rent the core plugger, have someone come to do that, punch holes in it, and then let those cores dry, seed, and drag those dried cores back over to create soil to seed contact. But do pay very close attention if your plan is to use some herbicides for weed control, that you're choosing products that are going to be forgiving.
Let me make one quick comment about that rate. I did a little math. If you're applying 1 gallon of solution with a pump sprayer, and that gallon of solution will cover 1,000 square feet of your lawn, that would be 2 milliliters of tenacity to get the 3-ounce rate. So 2 milliliters in 1 gallon of solution applied to 1,000 square feet will give you 3 ounces per acre.
Okay, so not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot.
Yeah, to do that. Question: for a turf that needs lime and reseeding, is it okay to apply both at the same time? And what about timing for fall fertilizer? So lime and reseeding, yeah, I see no issues with that in terms of using standard rates, recommended rates that we're seeing from soil testing labs. We can go all the way up to 50 pounds per thousand in lime if it's necessary in a single application. That's one of those situations where if you are basically covering your site in lime, I'd say you might want to put the lime out, get a little irrigation, rainfall on that, and move that off. But generally speaking, we would have to try. It says you're using pelletized lime, you should be good to go. Matter of fact, I would do almost any of these things in terms of seeding, coring, lime, and even a little bit of fertilization. We can do almost all of those at the same time. Your chances of success would always be improved if you could time any of that with irrigation events or rainfall as they come in. But it's a pretty forgiving system in terms of doing most of these things. And when you've got the chance on a weekend or an afternoon to really knock a lot of these out, I'm like, go for it. Knock as many of them out in sequence as you possibly can. And I always tell folks, think about it common sense wise. Do you think it can make it? If you think it can make a difference in terms of timing, then do that. But I've never picked up any issues in terms of liming then seeding, seeding then liming. Just have never seen any concerns in terms of seed germination with that type of sequence. And fall fertilization, yep, we're in that point right now here in the Southwest. I'm telling folks it's time. We're in the 3rd week of August. We think about anywhere between, our rule of thumb these days is somewhere in the neighborhood about 3/4 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet is what we're talking about. And that's every growing month. And September, October, and November in Virginia for us are pretty active growing months for cool season grasses. So that ballpark, about 3/4 pound of N per 1,000 per growing month. If you don't want to put that much because you don't like mowing grass, don't put that much out. But if you are committed to doing some fertilization to improve the health of your turf, its appearance, this is the time to do it. Not in the spring. Give it a little bit in the spring. Fall fertilization is the time to set the stage for the best, healthiest turf for next year. And the healthier you get that turf now, the less the weed and disease competition are going to be later on this year. So now is the time to get geared up. 3/4 pound of N if it's soluble nitrogen per 1,000 per growing month. And again, you get to do that a little bit later in the eastern part of the state. For us, we go up to basically about mid-November, and then we tell people it's probably about time to put it to bed.
Yeah, if you can get your soil right, I mean, we are in the transition zone, so granted, but good soil goes a long way to making all of these other inputs that we're talking about, all these pest problems, weed problems go away. I mean, you can manage turf with minimal inputs in Virginia. I do it at my home lawn. We got a couple questions. What about Bermuda grass? Plenty of that in Central Virginia.
No, that's could we replace a lot of the high maintenance? That one for last.
But the Bermuda grass one hasn't been answered yet.
Yeah, that was about pre-emergents.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought that was Bermuda control. Okay, so replacing high maintenance stuff with native grasses and flowers all depends on what you want. If you plant a lot of native grasses and flowers in your front lawn and you want to go play badminton on it, that's not going to work. But so it depends on what you want to use for that space. What function are you desiring? We use the turf grasses that are often recommended because they're extremely wear tolerant. They're extremely drought tolerant. Many of our native grasses are also drought tolerant, so there's some overlap between these, but it depends on the aesthetic that you're looking for. Lawns do a great job of accentuating other landscape features, whereas native plantings, it depends on the aesthetic you want, because a native planting is not going to accentuate another ornamental bed. It's going to look like an ornamental bed in itself.
Yeah, it's a great question. In our world, we get pinged with this one all the time, is how do you all work with a crop that requires so much chemistry? I guess one of the things we would remind is that we also work and do some current research in this area that's linked to, can we do things to increase pollinators, is part of a project that Dr. Askew and I are working on. And one of our biggest challenges is, and we've experienced this on campus and seen a lot of money spent, is folks want to go this direction, and we understand why you want to go this direction, but our experience has been, and that of our colleagues, is even we go in this direction, if you truly are going to have something that is functioning the way most people look it to function, if you don't have weed control in place at establishment, we basically are turning these areas over to invasives at tremendous numbers, because these grasses, all their beauty and everything about them being natives and wildflowers, is if you ever get them, that's awesome. Getting them in that condition, it is
Right.
so much more difficult than people give it credit for. So we're not against, but it's a great question.
And likewise, it depends on what you want. Many people can put out a native planting, and 70% of what comes in are weeds, thistles, and other things. Many of those weeds will serve pollinators, and you're happy. You have a native planting. That some of the plants may be invasives, but okay, but I still have a low maintenance area. If you want specific native plants in that planting and you want them to thrive and have ecosystem services that they're supposed to have, yes, it requires just as many inputs as a lawn. Insecticide, fungicide, possibly, definitely herbicide, or either that or you better have a deep pocketbook and be willing to transplant mature plants from the start, and a lot of labor to hand pull weeds, because that's, once you get these things established, just like lawn, what we're talking about right now with lawn weed control is the same way. Once you get your soil in place the way it should be, once you get the pests taken out and a good density lawn in place, you're done. You don't have to spray herbicides every year. You don't have to. Depending on the soil type, you may have to add a little fertility each year. But if you return your clippings, I would argue that with good soil, the need for these things go down and down. It's on these challenging sites for soil where we really need to stay on our inputs to make sure that we're getting all those benefits. Many of them are ecosystem servicing, erosion control, water filtration, carbon sequestration, all these things that turf does for us, just like other plants do.
We better move on. If you can't tell, this is one that we could go on all day.
Oh, sure. That'd be a great
this
topic for an entire webinar.
So, when renovating lawns, if top dressing with compost after aeration, is seeding best done before or after top dressing? Research at Penn State showed really didn't make any difference. I guess what they found was, if you say the benefit was probably best realized if you top dress with compost before aerating, which to me seemed backwards, but that was what their data suggested. But at the end of the day, Dr. McNitt, the turf specialist there, said it really doesn't matter. But using compost, huge benefits from compost. 1/4 of an inch depth is where you want to be. Tying that together with seeding and aeration, that's an absolute no-brainer. It'd be a great thing to do. Next question says, your Virginia Tech Ag Lab recommends significant amounts of lime needed in pastures and lawns. 1 acre pasture needs 1 ton plus of lime. Is it best to put the full amount down all at once or do multiple applications? Thanks to the lab for the great info. On their recommendation sheet, they will tell you what their criteria is for how much can go out in a single. So that 1 ton of lime, that's in relationship to what I was saying, the 50 pounds per 1,000 square feet, because an acre is 43,560 square feet. That's pretty much where they cap that amount per single application, and we even can get by with that in lawns to do that. So if it requires more lime than that, they're going to tell you to usually wait 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, depending on the amount that goes out. So follow that recommendation. And I've done it and put 100 pounds out at a time. The trouble is, it's just so much lime on the surface that when you go crazy in those rates, no issues with turf. My worry was if it rained on slopes, my lime is washing away.
Yeah, it's a lightweight material.
Yeah, it's a very lightweight material.
Surface runoff, it can move.
So that's been part of that challenge. So follow their recommendations. Next question, is there any benefit to using enhanced lime products? Or is this a marketing method for companies? They say you can use less lime with these products for the same result. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of enhanced lime products, but it's not because they are snake oils. They affect very rapid changes right at the soil, and we can pick up some plant responses. And if you pick up a plant response, that's a great thing. But the concept that less can do the same as more, when it comes down to the chemistry of a liming reaction, I always, when people say, you got to prove it to me, and I'm like, I write out a basic chemical lime reaction and say, here's the only way that lime works, regardless of what the lime source is. My opinion is, and the opinion of the soil scientists is, there isn't any way that you can use less of something to get the same result, unless that less of something is concentrated in lime product. Many of these types of materials actually don't have a calcium carbonate equivalent, a CCE value. When you look on a lime label, that's something to check for. The higher that percentage is when it comes to the lime recommendation, the closer that you would apply that recommended level that's on that soil test report. So these products are legit, but I can't buy into the fact that you can use less to do more. It will affect a change right at the soil surface, but ultimately it's still going to require that soil test recommended level of lime to affect the change in soil pH that you're looking for.
Let me see if I understand this correctly. So these products are giving you, with less product, they can give you more short-term plant response, but they're not going to give you the changes that you want to affect in the soil.
The answer is, I realize, and again, I have asked questions because I'm not a soil scientist. I don't know what I am. I dabble in lots of things. The soil scientists say that the key is in most of the titles of these materials. Most of them start out with soluble, and it's all about a soluble response. And so it gives you a quick response. And again, it might trigger that plant response, but the duration of that response is going to be very short-lived because you have not applied enough material to effectively change that soil pH.
Right.
And that's where you get it, and that's why a lot of people say it works. It does for a very short period of time. What grass grows best in shade and soil that doesn't drain quickly? Artificial turf is the ideal answer there. Japanese stilt grass, John said. That would be, the keys there, that drainage issue. The best shade grasses in Virginia are fine leaf fescues and St. Augustine grass. So fine leaf fescues in the cooler climates, St. Augustine in the warmer. St. Augustine is not nearly as concerned with wet soils as fine fescue is, and that's one of the biggest challenges. Is fine fescue does great in the shade, as far as even into Eastern Virginia. Dr. Durr's got some great plots over there in his shade trials with fine fescue. But once you bring poorly drained soils into the mix, that is a real challenge. And in that situation, I tell folks a lot of the time in the cooler climates, we're pretty much committed to using tall fescues and just planning on regular fall reseedings, because that moisture is just not conducive to fine leaf fescues persisting for long periods of time.
Would perennial rye play any role as a blend in that fescue, maybe a fescue rye? Or
It
no,
could,
no
but I'm
benefit?
just, yeah, in many cases, I don't see that ryegrass adds enough. We use ryegrass for the speed of
yeah.
germination, but these days, ryegrass germination isn't really that much faster than tall fescues in my experience, and it's kind of like there's nothing wrong with it, but I don't see that it brings a whole lot of extra potential to the dance. How do we bring pH up for landscape plants installed in bed soil of very low pH, so approximately 5.8? How can I safely increase soil pH around these plants? Again, maybe I'll talk to John. I'll let you, because this landscape bedding plants, this more your area. How would you answer this one?
If that question came in, my first one would be, I would definitely want to do the soil test. And I would, when you're taking that test, again, that's a composite sample. So you're looking at the entire bed. I would be tempted to treat the entire bed if it were me, and I would probably just go with a standard lime application, just using a calcitic or dolomitic lime, depending on the test at the rate recommended. And then I would tend to water that in. If you have any concern about sensitive plants in there. If you're really concerned about some things that you might have in there, I would probably just go ahead and wait until wintertime and do it when there aren't any plant materials up or very early in the spring. But that's the way I would do it. When you get into some kind of a slurry or applying that slurry accurately, I think that would be a difficult thing to do. So I probably would just treat that bed as a block, much the same as you would the lawn, and make that application of granular lime.
And John, as you mentioned, there's a lot of forgiveness with lime applications in landscapes as temperatures cool, because we've been talking this 50 pounds per thousand. But when we get into, especially in the lawn setting, and again, I would let John talk about what it would be from beds, but there's a lot of flexibility when we start getting into dormancy periods and even cool season grasses that have slowed down. And a lot of people tell me, well, what are things that I can do in November, December that maybe you'd suggest in lawns? And one of those in the turfgrass world is lime applications that time of year. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you're really working hard to bring pHs up to a targeted level and you're following those no more than 50 pounds per thousand per app, is we keep on applying that lime November, December, January to get out there, because that lime application is, we got to move it into the soil to affect the change in pH anyway. So what we're trying to do is get that soil adjusted to next spring when these plant materials are either resuming growth or in a bed situation going into the ground, that you've got the best soil that you possibly could have at that time.
Right. We're not feeding these plants with lime. We're adjusting the soil pH so that all the nutrients that are in the soil are more available to the plant. That's what the pH is governing. How available are those nutrients to the plant? So as John indicated, doing that in the wintertime is an ideal situation, because next year it's going to set the stage.
And the other piece of that, I have a bed, it's a 1,000 square foot bed. It tested at 5.3. It needed 150 pounds of lime per 1,000. And so what I've done over the last 2 or 3 applications is early in the spring, maybe late in the fall, I apply a 50-pound bag of lime to that, let it go in, and then monitor those plants for nutrient deficiency too, because I've got Monarda that has phosphorus deficiency in that bed because it is such a poor site. So we'll come in and do a little bit of a top dress around those plants when we see that. So it's a little bit of management there too. But I would say that in the landscape bed, 40 to 50 pounds of lime per 1,000 is about all it can take. It starts to make kind of a mess in there.
And what we want to encourage you is don't chintz on saving a few dollars here. John's talking about beds, and I love my beds, and I've yet to sample them. And now it bugs me that, well, maybe that's why some of my stuff is checking out. And I was like, and I only do this for a living.
Yeah, man, your stuff looks awesome compared to mine.
But you need to sample your beds separately from your lawn, okay, to do this. And I don't take these composite samples, because my beds with my mulch, and I'm always out there with my 20-20-20 foliar feeding and doing whatnot, I've got a very different environment there than that. So to me, that's something that's important, and it motivates me to, I'm going to go home and pull some soil samples from my bed and see if I can figure out what the heck's going on.
Well, if it makes you feel better, Mike, I haven't done my yard yet.
Okay, all right, we're on equal footing here. Question said, could you please define better enhanced lime products? When you look at many of these names are actually, they say enhanced or soluble in the name. What they are is it's all based on their solubility. And these are products, so when they tell you, and it's part of it feeds into the marketing about you only need to use this amount, well, that's very important. And the reason why is because they're so soluble that they can behave as desiccants and you could burn turf. That's part of what you've got to be careful with. And a lot of these products have got calcium hydroxide or calcium oxide in there. So a lot of people have heard things about quicklime. That's one that you'd never apply to an established turf or landscape bed. But if it was a newly prepared soil, you're trying to make an appreciable jump in pHs and are going to be able to incorporate it in, that would work great in order of doing that. But that's what it's all about. Look for the words enhanced or soluble lime. And those are the materials to pay attention to. And again, they are not snake oils, but they cannot effectively replace the amounts when it comes to literally converting pHs in soil, because a chemical reaction is a chemical reaction.
One thing I'd like to just touch on one more time, and I know we're definitely kind of preaching to the choir here, but that is about that soil to seed contact and just how important that is. It seemed like I had read some numbers that if you just went out and broadcast fescue seed over a lawn, establishment was in the single percents, 2%, and then with a good core aeration, you'd be up 40% establishment.
Yeah.
And maybe just talk for a moment about how key that is and what the different ways are that people could do that. Because we get that question, you know, well, I've got a spike type aerator, I've got a core type, I just broadcast seed.
Yeah, generally speaking, I call broadcast seed over lawns bird feed. Okay, and most of it's going to die. And it's one of these, if you feel better from doing it, then that could be worth quite a bit itself. But from the standpoint of what I would predict as success, you think about a tiny little package that a seed is and a very small plant coming up, soil to seed contact, John, you got to have it if you're anticipating success. If you've got a really poor lawn, you say, well, there's the starting point for soil to seed contact. Now, if you're ready for some work, you could get a heavy garden rake and go out there and rough that site up physically and break through that dead turf debris or whatever weed material that you have there. That's where I'm saying, hey, get the aerator, run that over. A vertical mower, a dethatcher is also a possibility, but you know that plays into, well, the dethatcher might cause more damage to my desirable turf. So everything here has got its pros and cons. A split seeder is a possibility, running it in multiple directions. Again, I tell people, if you're going to use a split seeder, then scalp your turf down. We don't want to scalp turf, but we're trying to enhance establishment. You've got to do something that literally gets seed touching soil, because when you start having rainfall or moisture and that root comes out, if that root doesn't find a medium to extract water and nutrients from within a matter of hours, that's a dead plant. So I agree with you. I would bet you just broadcasting seed would be in the single digits in terms of percentages. So we've got to give it a fighting chance. Shawn and I did work several years ago now, but our people, we know how difficult Bermuda grass is to manage, and everybody thinks, oh, Bermuda grass, you should be able to walk out there and just throw it on top of the ground and it would take over. And our research showed that it was almost impossible to do. And we had to literally strip kill or spot kill turf in order to introduce Bermuda grass into cool season grasses, right, if we wanted to convert them to Bermuda.
Here's we got an image of a dethatcher, and the marketed purpose of this machine doesn't have much use in cool season turf, but it is an outstanding machine that's available at consumer outlets everywhere. That it is a seed preparatory device. You throw a couple of cinder blocks on top of that machine, pull it around behind the lawnmower, and it is an outstanding way.
Basically like a spring action.
Yes, it's just going to scratch the soil much more vigorously and effectively than you can manually with a rake. And we use it in our research when we're establishing new sites. Even if we till, we will go through after tillage and we will take a tractor with smooth tires and we will just completely pack the entire area, because we need, you know, lawn or turf areas to be very smooth. And after everything is smoothed out, we'll take one of those little dethatchers and we'll scratch the entire area up in conjunction with our seeding. We'll seed first, scratch later. Sometimes we scratch, seed, and then scratch again. It really, you can do it in any manner of ways, but it's an outstanding machine to encourage soil to seed contact while seeding.
Next question is, what about using straw above seed rather than compost or scratching the soil. I don't think the straw can replace the scratching part, just
Right,
what
we do
Shawn's
both.
talking
When
about.
when we do our establishments, we'll scratch, and once all that's done, then we lay the
Yeah.
straw.
But the straw is an awesome mulch material. It's my favorite mulch material of all because there should be no need to remove it. If you truly are working with small grain straw, so we always emphasize don't buy hay.
Yeah.
You don't want to bring in all those weeds that are out there. Straw is going to have plenty of seed in it, but that's going to be wheat or barley or cereal rye, and those things germinate. You just mow them and they're going to die because they're winter annuals. But remember, straw does not ensure soil to seed contact, so it might promote germination, but if that seed comes up underneath the straw because it enhanced moisture and improved temperature, it's still not going to persist. So incorporate straw as your mulch material. I think it's another nice alternative or combination with compost, etc. But when it's time, don't rake it up. Just mow it right back into the canopy and add that organic matter back into the soil.
And the amount of straw to add, we often see commercial outlets. I don't know if it's because money is no option, but they'll have straw out there well over ankle deep.
Yeah.
And that's not really,
we're not trying to insulate the soil. Our rule
we're
of
not
thumb
trying
is
to scatter straw over the entire
No.
neighborhood either
No.
when it gets windy.
it's basically a standard bale that a farmer uses. A standard bale per 1,000 square feet puts you in the range. And what they were trying to achieve when they came up with that was, if you look at that and you've walked out, sprinkled it around, is you should still be able to see through that straw mulch and see the canopy underneath of it, some ground. So yeah, we're not trying to create shade here. We're trying to basically improve moisture management. One of your biggest challenges with straw is if you live somewhere where the wind blows, what happens to your straw? And that's why when you watch highway departments and even landscape contractors that do seeding using that, many times they'll add some type of a tackifier or an adhesive into a spray tank to go over top of it to literally try to glue it down. But it's an awesome material. It's my favorite. And when we're doing establishments, that is my favorite material to use. Outside of germination cloth is another one. And we don't think about that one quite often. But you can buy commercial germination cloth that's also sometimes called insect cloth. And if you have small areas and don't mind paying for that, that material just rolls out like a piece of carpet, tack it down with a few sod staples. Can't leave that one in place. That one will need to be picked up and removed. But again,
So you have to look for them. But they do have some that are marketed.
Oh, yeah, Whitney said there are some that are marketed as they remain in place and break down, and she's correct. They are few and far between, and I thought 10, 15 years ago that those things would explode on the market, but they haven't to this point in time.
It's like an extremely thin sheet that you can essentially about see through, but it does a great job at insulating. As far as keeping straw in place, can you pack or irrigate? Hand water, just anything you can do?
Irrigation will help, but again, it's in windy, that's always been part of the issue. Is I put down my straw and my straw into my neighbor's yard. Right. Same thing, it happens with, why am I going to bother picking up leaves if they're blowing down the street? So these are political battles to be fought, but that's the one challenge that we have with straw, is that will it stay in place? And of course that is but I think a little irrigation, maybe a little driving over would help, but I don't think it would guarantee. Going to be aerifying and seeding property in Mecklenburg County, Virginia. Any recommended fescue seed blends for Southside? Take a look on our the BCE website, the extension website. I haven't seen that it's published yet. I've asked, can we get the 2018-19 turfgrass variety recommendation list online? So it's done. Everybody's just busy scrambling in terms of time. But even if you found last year's, which was the 2017-2018 guides, it will still be probably 85% the same materials. If you can find any fescue seed blends with 2 or more of those varieties in there, then you're doing your due diligence. You're doing the best that you can in terms of what our data show about the best opportunity for success. Remember, we have no guarantees because you just simply can't make guarantees in Virginia's climate. But that be where to do in your fact finding is look at those fescue varieties on our recommended or promising list. That's simply called the Virginia recommended variety list. And again, it's posted always on the VCE website. 1819 is coming. It's with Extension Pubs. We just haven't got it in print yet, but that's where you check to find out that information.
And Whitney's posting that.
Okay, she's going to
response
post the
now.
link.
Yeah.
Great. All right, we are down to 5 minutes. So if you say, I've been waiting to ask a question, we want you to do that. And remember, when you get through, if you all would please give us some feedback on our survey. Let's see, somebody has raised their hand. We do have a question coming through here. Another St. Augustine question from Coastal Hampton Roads. Fixing low spots in St. Augustine. I've heard that putting sand on 50-50 sand soil mix or a 50-50 sand soil mix will fill in low spots. Is this true? If true, what kind of sand should be used? Should be put down in the fall. It can be used, but I would be leery of the straight sand on top of your soil material unless your soil is quite sandy. Most times when we introduce different textured layers, we just end up creating problems. It sure is easy to work with sand, but for your situation here, Bob, I would try to go with something more closely related to your existing soil if you can, and slowly but surely raise up. St. Augustine is one of these plants. It and Bermuda grass are ones that we literally can keep top dressing and basically grow the plant up as it goes. Your challenge will be at this time of year, there's not going to be a lot of opportunity for that. So you don't want to go out there and just literally bury it under 1.5 inches or 2 inches, but definitely start raising those spots up and periodically top dress. But be leery about just straight sand. If you can find something that's probably a little more like your native soil, a little heavier textured, I think that'll be something that'll work best for you long run.
Do it in the afternoon when the turf is dry. Make sure the soil you're using is fairly dry, or at least, will work with the hand easily. And half shovel to your depression, and then get down there with your hand and shake it in. It'll pretty much disappear in the turf. Again, like Dr. Goatley said, you don't want to bury it with 1 inch, 1.5 inches, but you can probably get in there with a 1/2 inch, depending on how deep the spot is, because that grass, it has to compete with all the surrounding grass. And as you mow, most of the green shoots are going to be up on the same level. So working that soil down into the stem material is not a big deal for the grass.
Have one more here. We'll take this one real quick. Have you heard of Livingston's Blend Compost from Spotsylvania? What do you think of using this on grass? I have not heard, but I would tell you who to contact if you send an email. It's Dr. Greg Avanilo, who's our compost and biosolids specialist, or work there with the local extension agent there in Spotsylvania and see what they can tell you about that. And let's see, because we use a lot of composted biosolids materials in our trials here at Blacksburg, and you give them appropriate time to do their thing, they're now doing their thing. They look great. And I bet you this is one of those types of materials, but I really don't know. So maybe start there locally with Spotsylvania County Extension, see what they can tell you. And if they don't know, we'll end up taking this down to Dr. Avanilo at Tech.
Most composts are going to help. The thing that you need to watch is to make sure that it's completely composted. Completely
composted, yes. And again, our rule of thumb, that 1/4 inch is not, I've had issues actually in Spotsylvania County where I had a homeowner call to yell at me. You told me compost was wonderful. I put down 1 inch. Don't put down 1 inch. 1/4 inch per 1,000 would be the typical rate to go with. All right, so with that, we're going to close this up at 11 o'clock. Thank you all very much for attending. We appreciate it.
Thanks.